Okay, so do you want to start with your presentation, or do you want to?
Sure, right? So we normally have a more organized format where we have so we do the intros, and then there's usually a plugin review. Unfortunately, we don't really know the information on the plugin review this time. But if we want to, we have time at the end. If there's a plugin that you just want to show, you can just do it right here and show it off. But, yes?
I have a review of some information of one of the supposed to be.
Okay. We can discuss that.
But I can't do it up there. I can just give you some information
okay.
about it.
Great.
I can just talk.
Sure.
At the end, what we'll do is we'll do kind of a information sharing. So if you have a plugin that you really like and you want to tell us about it, then tell us if there's one that you need, and you know, plugin that does this. I need to know how to do this. You can kind of bring it up if somebody knows. Okay.
And then normally there's room just for general Q&A, which I just encourage. If you have any questions that obviously wouldn't be addressed in any one of these presentations, just we'll have some time for some Q&A for whatever's on your mind, whether you've heard about WordPress or some issue that you might be stuck on. Again, as a group, just kind of answer it and discuss it.
And normally we're more organized. Carol's not here. She's our leader.
We see how important she is. We can't do anything.
There's definitely a different tone when she's not there.
Cool. Well, I have a little presentation just about email in WordPress. I know that's like a weird combination of things to put in the same sentence, but a little bit about me. So my name is Joe Manna. I actually work over here at Fusionsoft down the road that way. And what I do over there is I work with integrations and partnerships to basically allow other companies to integrate with us. An example that I was pleased with is like Zapier. If you guys heard about Zapier in recent weeks, they actually integrate with us, and I work with the team over there to make sure that they work nicely with Infusionsoft. But I'm not here to pitch you on Infusionsoft, but in full disclosure, it is an email service provider, among other things. But nothing I pitch here is about Infusionsoft in particular. So let me go ahead and fire up that presentation. If it loads.
So,
yes.
even though you're not supposed to give a pitch, I didn't know that that's what that was.
Sure.
So what is Fusion, you say?
Yeah.
It's an email software?
Well, I'm more than happy to talk about Infusionsoft afterwards, but Infusionsoft is a small business CRM, an email marketing and e-commerce tool all in one.
Okay.
But there's other email marketing services that I'll be mentioning in here just for some objectivity and practical tips that you can just put into action right away. So, like I mentioned, WordPress is a content management system, right? So it's typically not used for email. It's used for publishing content. However, as WordPress becomes more pervasive, when it comes to businesses and content marketing and content publishing, there becomes a need to actually communicate with customers and communicate with prospects for business applications. But even for personal applications, you probably have a list of subscribers somewhere, and they want to hear from you. That is a very practical use of using email with WordPress. So there's a number of ways to do that. We're not going to get into the specifics, but we're going to talk about the high level of email. Because it's, and a lot of people I talk to about WordPress, they don't realize this. It's not even just this group. There's actually independent consultants out there that do websites, and usually email is just a question that's on their mind, but they're a little uncertain about. So we're going to hopefully answer some of those questions here today. So the issue with WordPress when thinking about email is that it's not as simple as just you open up Gmail and send an email. We wish it was that simple. The reality is that email is much more dramatically different than web-based content in the way that we think about it. So an example of that is typically we just think of a blog post as we just put in the content, what you see is what you get. The reality is that email, it's what you don't see is what you don't get. So what I mean by that is in email there's reputation, there's email spam filters, there's IPs and what they call IP warming. We'll talk a little bit about that. That makes it more complex. So it's not even just in the content that you're sending, it's in the infrastructure around the email. And historically, WordPress would be hosted on a a server, a web server. Well, web servers are not default to be configured to send email, let alone send email in a professional way. If you've ever set up WordPress and you ever forgot the password and it emailed you, what's actually happening is that WordPress is sending you an email from the web server. Forgot password emails are known as transactional emails, and those usually aren't a problem. But anything beyond that, it can become problematic. So to walk you through some of that, I'll be honest, I borrowed this image from a company called Return Path, and they basically explain all the various stages of what an email goes through, from the moment you hit send to the moment it gets to your recipients. This is applicable in any situation, whether it's a one-off email or a marketing email, or if you're at a huge company and you're sending a huge email. So I apologize, it might be hard to read, but basically over at the bottom, it goes from the bottom up, this image, so I'll just walk you through it. So does the business run on email? We're going to assume the answer is yes, right? So you want to send an email from the business. It's not a business, let's just assume the word WordPress, right? So typically a web server is not an email server, so it doesn't send a lot of email. So if you are on a new web server or you're in a shared hosting environment, something we discussed a few weeks ago about different web hosts that operate WordPress, typically a shared hosting environment is a new IP address to the other party. No emails typically go to another party off of a web server. And the reality is that whenever you're sending email, especially in a professional capacity, that email, that IP address, that server should always be sending email around the clock. There should be no periods of being offline. So as you continue on, it goes from the bottom up, right? So basically, your email address, you've been sending email from it for 30 days or more. Typically, what it is, let's just pretend the recipient is on Gmail. Gmail listens for how many times that mail server talks to their server. And if there's a period of absence, it's not sure. It flags that email for saying, why is this mail server sending us email? And what it is, there's a process in the email industry called IP warming. And again, all this stuff is taken care of by the email service providers, but basically they route email messages to go through different servers. Again, the web server that your WordPress site is hosted on, even on managed service providers like Pagely or WP Engine, are not designed for sending email. So that said, your sender reputation, meaning the reputation of that email and the infrastructure around it, is really based on a variety of outcomes. So the first of which is volume and frequency. How often is that email server sending email, and how frequent is it sending that email? How many of the recipients are what they call unknown users? So people delete email addresses, people import illicit email addresses into the email software, and they send an email to them. The receiving end of the server listens if that's a valid email address or not. If it's not a valid email address, it's being against you. Obviously, if there's a spam complaint, so if someone ever hits report spam on your email, even if it's a legitimate email, even if they opted in, that email server will ding you, and ding you pretty hard for it. So they're looking at all this at the whole time, continuously, not just on your one email, but on the life of that server. Obviously, the infrastructure we're talking about here, if we find that an IP address is continually changing, also known as a practice called snowshoeing that some providers do, that can be suspect. The opposite of that is what like MailChimp does, is that they have a huge network of mail servers that send email. And the emails that you send out are rotating among any one of those, we'll just say 200 servers. So, but normally for just a single server, let's just say for a small office, the email should be leaving out of one IP address. And obviously the last one, and it's most important, it's called spam traps. So spam traps are kind of equivalent to a bear trap. You don't want to land in them, right? So a spam trap is basically, it is a fake email address that was put out on the internet, usually for harvesting purposes. So when spammers crawl that email address within their email software, it will automatically tell that email service provider that that is a fake email address and that this person used really unwanted and illicit methods to acquire their list. The reality is people have spam traps on their list and don't even know it. Even if it's in their address book or whatever, right? These are fake email addresses that end up on someone's list, and that will instantly ding them and will basically cause email services to blacklist you right away with really no recourse. They'll just say you hit a spam trap, you're done. There's no appeal, that's it, you're done. So that said, those are the factors that are always up in play whenever an email gets sent. And this whole process occurs in a fraction of a second, which is the beauty of it. So anyway, so once an email is sent, I'm assuming that you didn't have a volume issue or frequency issue, you didn't have an unknown user issue, you didn't have a complaint issue or an email infrastructure issue, and you didn't hit a spam trap, you're okay. Continue on. And the next aspect is called email authentication, using what they call SPF or DKIM. We'll talk about that in a second. The point of that is it's verifying who is the legitimate sender of this email. Is it, indeed, is it the actual sender, or is it another party sending it on someone's behalf? Normally, you want to make sure that you are sending as yourself, and if not yourself, then you have someone else who is legitimately authorized to send email for you. So we'll talk about that in a second, but as I mentioned here, the people who have the highest reputation typically have a 42% higher chance of making it past spam filters if they have SPF and something called DKIM configured. DKIM is basically just sort of like a little bit of like email encryption, but also with the authentication rolled into it. Don't worry about it. Mostly ESPs today already have DKIM set up. So this is the other thing. So IP addresses aren't the only thing that they're looking at. They're looking at domains. Who actually owns this domain? Even though it's a set of numbers, who actually owns it? And they want to see that, does this one IP address resolve to one name? It's totally possible in a shared hosting environment, for instance like a dream host, that one IP address can resolve to many names. Even in a managed hosting environment like the WP engine, one IP address can resolve to many names. So what the email services do, they authenticate and they check, okay, this email says it's from MailChimp, but is it really? And they just do a quick reverse lookup on the IP, make sure it's from MailChimp. If it's not from MailChimp, that's a red flag. To fix that, if that was ever an issue, A, you would talk to your email service provider, or B, if you're sending the emails yourself, you would have an IT person help you reconfigure your network for it. All right, so at this point, it's going pretty well. Now, if someone hits report spam, basically, if you are exceeding 1.5% on a spam complaint rate, you're not going to make it to the inbox. And if you are, it'll be a surprise. What emails do, what the email services do, they look at the overall complaint volume. We'll just say out of an hour, or it could be out of a day, it could be out of a month. And if the number of people who report spam totals 1.5% or more, which is the industry standard, then they will be suspect, and they will ding your email accordingly. So just to put that in perspective, right? So out of, let's say, 1,000 emails, that just means like 15 people that report spam. Now, that's just the industry standard. Other services, like Infusionsoft, we hold it down to 1%. So because we expect that our users have clean email lists, and spam is usually not a problem. But email services vary, so always check into the terms and conditions and their acceptable use policy to determine what that rate is. MailChimp also has very high standards, and they do it at more of an automatic level. So MailChimp is a different beast entirely. But the point is they minimize spam. That's the point. Now, if you do get a spam complaint, the email services will check to see, all right, can we notify the sender of this mail that this is a bad situation that just occurred? Well, that's called a feedback loop. So a feedback loop actually notifies the sender of that email that the email bounced, or it was reported as spam, and they expect the sender of that email to take action to remove them off the list, period. If there's no feedback loop, it'll bounce, and they'll see that, and that's another ding against you, because a feedback loop cannot be established if there's no feedback loop already established. There's also a practice known as whitelisting. If you're ever familiar from the old days when you had to try to send to AOL, and you had an email server, you had to whitelist with AOL. Well, that's the same thing. It's called feedback loops. Gmail, up until this time, up until about 3 weeks ago, they did not have any feedback loops because Gmail was just that confident in their engineering but they don't need to set up a feedback loop. They've recently just implemented a new feedback loop in their system for qualified senders, for instance, like a MailChimp or any others, in that tier of senders to set up a feedback loop. Because what they're realizing is that those senders have meet the criteria of trust that they can transmit user data to say, okay, take them off your list and solve this problem. Previously, they would just dump those emails to the spam folder, and it was a crappy experience for everyone. So that said, so then the feedback loop would actually cause a spam complaint, and that ESP would then say, why did you send this email? You can't send them again. And hopefully, through that scolding or that interaction, you don't send any more spam emails. Then you move on, right? Then we start looking into the recipients again. If you're sending emails and they're unknown users, or the mailbox is full, or whatever reason, right, the recipient is not checking their email, they call it a bounce. And it's not a bounce whenever you set up an out of the office message. Don't worry about that. That's normal. That's not considered a bounce. But anything else, like a mailbox is full, is considered a bounce. ISPs, like your recipients, definitely track if you hit an email and it bounces. You generally want to keep your bounce rate low, but it's absolutely normal to have a high bounce rate at first. The idea is that you don't keep doing it. So that said, you remove the non-existent addresses. Let's say someone moved, and as we know, in this entrepreneurial environment, lots of people are changing companies and jobs. It's absolutely plausible that an email address is invalid. However, if you have evidence that suggests like they actually are emailing me off of this and they're sending emails and there's someone to email, just talk to your ESP and they will work it out and do some further diagnostics. Obviously, you want to make sure that you are only emailing people that opted in legitimately, you didn't buy a list or anything else, and that's what causes bounce addresses and spam traps to get on the list. So all right, so you have your bounce rate and unknown users drop down to below 2%. You're good. So then, and then you accidentally, because someone else imported a list or someone mistyped an email, you now hit a spam trap. Now what? So as a result, right, your email reputation drops significantly. And then basically, right, because they're decoys, right, there's no recourse. You're done. You're already guilty. There's no sense of proving your innocence that you hit a spam trap. Anyways, and it continues on, basically, so then the email subscribers eventually get your email, your reputation continues to increase, the people interact with your email, so your reputation as a sender increases, the email domains, the web addresses in your email also increase in reputation, say it's a legitimate web address to your blog, that increases in reputation, and it's good. So if you send good emails to people that want your email and you maintain good list hygiene, you'll never have a problem. The reality is, a lot of people have problems because they make the assumption that they imported an entire address book or they imported an old list from many years ago into their list, and they enter into a situation where they're dealing with this. You don't want to deal with this. This is painful. You're paying money. Your emails are not going out. That's a problem. So how does this relate to WordPress? I know you're still probably wondering that, right? So when people are trying to send mails out of WordPress, WordPress itself and the web server that it's on generally does not have this infrastructure to do bounce handling, to do anti-spam, to make sure the emails are authenticated right away with DKIM. So there's a lot of other pieces that occur behind the scenes with an email service provider. So as we could see, if you look at your inbox today, the problem is not solved, right? If you just go to the spam folder in your Gmail, you could see that the problem still exists. Because of Gmail, and again, I'm picking on it because it's most common, but all ISPs do this, they're constantly scoring new patterns and new behaviors in your email. And your WordPress site just does not have the tools required to send legitimate, powerful emails that people want in their inbox regularly. For a lost password message, like if you forgot your password, you needed to reset password, and it was going to email you, it could most likely end up in your spam folder. But the user is willing to go to that link to find that email. Most users, like on a blog subscription list, are not going to go to that effort to achieve that. So the point is here, out of that entire little map and explaining all this, is that email reputation is vital, right? If you don't have the email infrastructure supporting what is supposed to be a legitimate interaction with email, you're going to have problems. And if you don't have a problem now, you can still send an email and it might still get to the inbox. You will have a problem later because people always unsubscribe. People always hit report spam at some point in the email lifetime. And because of that, the damage is almost unrepairable. So these are the types of emails that you got to keep in mind. For most day-to-day uses, most WordPress hosts are designed to handle the lost password emails. That is what they call a transactional message. Now, before I explain more on this, so a transactional message means that it was an automated message that was automatically sent because the user took an immediate action. Lost passwords. Maybe when you created a user, WordPress emailed you as an admin telling you a new user was created. Those are transactional. You generally don't have to worry about those. Those are just fine because there's so few and far in between. It's very unlikely you're going to send thousands of forgot password emails. It's not going to happen. So, but where it does blur the lines is when you maintain a blog subscription list. Say people have opted in to hear from your blog, or they want you want to send them information about a marketing offer. There are tools to collect their email address. There's plugins for that, and there's services for that to make it easy to send it from your WordPress web server. Unfortunately, those plugins, you have to understand how they work, which we'll talk about in a second. Those plugins don't always account for the fact that your WordPress web server is not a mail server. There's a lot of different technology involved in a mail server and how it sends out messages. A WordPress site will work for a very small volume, but anything above, I don't know, we'll say a few hundred, it can be problematic. And basically the most problematic item here is obviously marketing emails. You'd never want to send emails out of WordPress that are of a marketing nature, right? If you can send things like, hey, thanks for subscribing to your blog, and you just send a blog entry for a small volume, you'll be just fine. But there's probably other things, right? As new plugins come into WordPress, those new plugins interact differently with subscribers. Those plugins might interact differently with admins and other users on your WordPress site. So that's why email matters in this world for WordPress. Now, the other aspect here that we're going to talk about is email service providers. There are some providers that have some really awesome integrations with WordPress where what they do is that instead of sending an email through your WordPress's web server, it captures that email and sends it through their servers. And that is absolutely valuable, and they're actually, some of them are free. Once you start using them a lot, they turn paid. But they're definitely something I recommend if you're doing sort of a larger scale operation with your WordPress site. For most people, you generally don't have to worry about this unless you're doing it for themselves. So this is where I talk about email service providers. So examples of these, you've probably heard of some of them. So Constant Contact, MailChimp, Aweber. There's a couple in there, Amazon SES and SendGrid. Not many people know that unless you're in the development space. Those are basically what we call kind of like white label email services that you can bolt right into your WordPress site or any other web application and send emails. They're definitely developer friendly, but they are more difficult to work with as an end user. But they're also insanely cheap. They're like fractions of a penny per email, not even. And obviously there's more sort of established companies, sort of in that Constant Contact territory, kind of like Infusionsoft, where that would be your CRM software. So if you're already using a service like Marketo or Eloqua or some other marketing system that's used deeply in your business, that's where you could probably check with them and see if they have an integration with WordPress. At this time, just in full disclosure, we don't have an integration with WordPress. Yes?
Do you actually need to have that integration with WordPress? Because I use an email service provider that I send out my newsletter. I have it tacked on my various websites, which are not WordPress. And all I'm doing is putting in my little code that then gives them the sign up.
Right.
The sign up thing. Can't you just do that in WordPress?
Absolutely.
For any of them.
Absolutely.
Legitimate.
Right. So what's happening is that you're not sending mail directly out of WordPress. No. You're sending mail out of the ESP.
No.
That is the recommendation I recommend in most cases. If you can't send it out of that ESP for whatever reason, let's just say it was like a community website and people signed up to receive notifications of new articles in certain categories. Sometimes, some WordPress sites, you might want to send it directly out of WordPress. It's possible that could happen. But most cases, you run a business, you run a hobby site, you run a networking site, you can absolutely just lean on the ESP and trust them to handle the rest for you. and really just drop in the web form to sign up right on your site.
So there is no real need to do integrated. What is integrated with WordPress mean?
We'll talk about it.
Okay.
So basically, just in general, ESPs offer these benefits to all users, usually at multiple price points. So the first and foremost is authentication. Any serious ESP, worth their weight in gold, is going to have authentication set up. They're going to offer DKIM on their outgoing messages. They're going to give you tools and resources to set up SPF if needed, so you can send emails from your own site. They're definitely uptime, strong. They're usually never down. If there's downtime in an email server, be cautious. There should not be any downtime in an email server. They're generally secure, right? If you sign in, hopefully you see a green lock in your browser. If you don't see a green lock, don't sign in, especially on public Wi-Fi. They offer tools to segment and organize your list, usually by tagging or other interest levels. They offer tools and automatically, usually without your involvement, to manage the unsubscribes and tag people that they've unsubscribed. And obviously, they have a good email reputation, which you can check. There's a tool called senderscore.org. It's actually ran by a company called Return Path. They'll give you a quick analysis as to whether that email server is legitimate or not. And obviously, they offer a wealth of analytics and reporting, which is absolutely vital, because if you look at your analytics, you can also do better list segmentation. And then, obviously, email authoring. To create an email in WordPress, right, it requires a little bit of code to do that if you want to create custom emails to get sent out. These services, you don't need to know code. You just got to drag and drop, write in some text, drop in a picture, and you're done. But generally speaking, ESPs are good. They're relatively affordable. A lot of them offer free plans for smaller accounts. I think MailChimp is free up to 2,000 or 3,000 subscribers. So it's definitely worth getting familiar and trying them out for a smaller operation. I actually use MailChimp on my own site because I'm not really using it for marketing. I'm just using it for a blog subscription. But there's other services. There's iContact, Aweber. There's any one of them out there that offer plans that help you accomplish certain benefits. So now we're going to talk a little bit about email authentication. So whenever I mention DKIM and SPF, what all that means in layman's terms is that the other ISP, the other email provider, is quickly looking at your email of saying, is this email from who they say they are? Right? Are they who they claim? Is this email safe to put in the inbox? If we're not sure, we're not going to put it in the inbox, we'll put it in the spam folder. If we are really sure it's not safe, and such as this person's already been blocked from us before, we're just going to delete this email and not even tell them. We're just going to drop it. And then ultimately, is this a trusted sender? So if the email perhaps has illicit content or has attachments in it, if it's a trusted sender, it'll override that. Meaning, is this a sender that someone has already added to their address book? Is this a sender that the recipient has clicked show images from? If so, we're going to go ahead and let it pass. That's simply what email authentication is looking for. Obviously, remember the days of email phishing. You get emails from AOL member services or PayPal or Visa, or you're obviously a bank, and they want you to update your billing information and stuff. All of that was possible because there was not email authentication. Because anyone in the email protocol today, you could just send an email from someone else. That's the nature of it. You're allowed to do that. The problem is that without authentication, that's possible. With authentication, this is the check and balance to make sure, okay, if this email is not from actually PayPal and these specific servers on PayPal, we're not going to send it. We're not going to deliver it. So that's simply what email authentication is looking for. I know the terms SPF and DKIM might be new, and you'll be like, wait, what? Don't worry about it. It's a very simple process. We're going to show you what that looks like. So email authentication is achieved when the links and the domains are safe, right? So if the domains have not been reported as spam, pro tip, don't use bit.lys in your email. Don't use other shortened links in your email because those are also used by spammers, and those links are also generally indicated. The domain is indicated to be abusive, so don't use those. Bit.lys or shortened links. So if you ever shortened a link on bit.ly or any other service that shortens a link from here to here, don't use those in an email. It's better to have a longer link if it's just the one link of where it needs to go. Oh, that's cool. Also, if your site is listed in Google, as having malware. You might have seen this on some sites that you've searched for, and it says this site is believed to have, malware or might be compromised. That's a red flag. You should not be sending email from that domain, because any servers that see the email containing that link will not accept the message because they think you're sending out malicious software. That's a totally different topic. We kind of touched on it last month about security, but in a nutshell, if your site is hosting malware of any kind and it's being flagged by the Google Safe Browsing Project, your email deliverability will sink dramatically. Obviously, email authentication is achieved when you use SPF on your domain and or if DKIM is used. You don't need DKIM, it's just a recommendation to use DKIM. And generally, whenever a recipient permits your email in their inbox. So if someone whitelists your domain or your email address, you're good to go. But it's hard to ask recipients, because think about your own behavior. Do you really whitelist every single sender who asks you to? Probably not. There's probably some senders you probably want to get good deals from, like Living Social or Groupon. You do that just so you don't, you can see the products. But in most cases, most people don't do that. The interesting thing is that Gmail made a change probably a couple months ago or so to automatically enable images. It's important to know that that will dramatically impact your email analytics, because it shows that everyone on Gmail opened your email. Reality is they're not. What Gmail is doing is that they're proxying those images on your behalf. So there's no need to tell the user to enable images, because Gmail has already enabled it by default. So here we go. So what SPF does, and this is actually the top recommendation, if you're doing nothing else, even if you use an ESP, and you have the from address as in coming from, joe@mydomain.com, from an ESP, you absolutely should use SPF. Even if you have an ESP, you should use SPF. That's the recommendation, and that this whole talk can be summarized as. So what SPF does, again, Sender Policy Framework, it basically says that domain A is allowed to send mail on behalf of domain B. So what that means is, let's say I'm using MailChimp and I'm sending out blog updates. I'm authorizing MailChimp to send email from joe@joemana.com. That's it. That's all SPF really does. Without SPF, it's assumed that you don't authorize that. And you can also say never send or never accept email not coming from these servers. So as a domain owner, within your domain control panel on a service like GoDaddy or whatever, you can just simply add in a SPF record that details this. The problem is, if you use multiple services to send email, you have to test it first, otherwise you could run into problems. So we'll break it down, it'll make sense. So this is the flow, right? So you send an email, right? Again, let's assuming we're sending this off of like MailChimp, right? I'm using MailChimp. I sent an email that's allegedly from joe@acme.com. That email gets to the recipient. They're now looking, does acme.com allow Gmail to send email, right? Okay, it does. All right, but does acme.com deny others to send email? If it's no, right, then it won't deliver the message. If it's yes, if it's no, it'll deliver it probably to the spam folder. If it's yes, it will delete it. It'll drop it. So that's just, again, the few questions I showed earlier, that's exactly what the email server is looking at.
Okay, you
Yeah.
said that you're sending this from MailChimp, but it says via Gmail. So one of the things that I'm having a hard time, I know what you're talking about, but you're like way over most of our heads.
I'll break it down.
I'm familiar with that back in April. Yahoo decided that they were no longer going to allow this, that it needed to be authenticated more strongly with the from address.
For Yahoo exclusively, yes.
Yes, and then they talked about that Gmail was going to follow sometime. And are you saying that that's now happened?
It's unlikely Gmail's going to follow, because there's 500 million email users. They would basically crash the internet. Like no emails.
But what I'm saying is, if you're sending one email, if I send an email to you, there's no concern about that.
Right.
It either goes through or it doesn't go through.
Right.
Okay. But if you're a business person and you're sending a newsletter to somebody, you want to use a third-party email sender.
Right.
Because they have all these built-in things.
Sure.
Now, what happened with me is that like half of my emails didn't go out because of Yahoo changing their requirements.
Yeah.
And so I had to change my address. My from address is a Yahoo address.
Uh-huh.
I use Yahoo all the time.
And that's what they're prohibiting.
And that's
Is that
what they
from
prohibited. Same thing if it was Gmail,
Right.
they would prohibit. So what I had to do is I had to go in and create an email from one of my web domains.
Yeah.
And then use that as my from address on my service.
Right.
And then it started to go through and all this authentication stuff was able.
And you solved it.
Right, right. But I understand.
Yahoo is I think AOL is starting to follow suit now, but I don't know.
Right, I think
AOL
AOL is doing it too, but one of the things that they were saying is that this is gonna be like email-wide, internet-wide.
They're monitoring
That's
it.
gonna
They're seeing what the
eventually
outcomes
move
are.
in that direction.
Right. Generally, for business purposes, generally speaking, you should not use a personal email as the from address. The caveat is if you don't use a personal email, it's unlikely you'll actually check that email. You know, we've all seen the no reply emails. You should always use a legitimate email that you actually have configured.
What do you mean?
So let's just say I don't know, it was widgets.com, right? You should have, contact@widgets.com to be the sender.
Right.
And you should be able to check that email address legitimately
Right.
if there's issues.
Years ago, I used to do that with
Right.
my websites, but
Right.
I don't do that anymore because I move around a lot
Mhm.
and reconfigure where my email. So I use Yahoo because it's mobile.
Right.
You can go anywhere. So, and a lot more people are using Yahoo and Gmail as their main email address.
Yep.
So,
The one exception is Google Apps for Enterprise will probably never make that change because they're using that for business. Gmail at the personal level, that most of us use Gmail, probably when they make a change, they will be sure to announce it and tell you what the next steps are. Yahoo did that. It's just it was a very evasive action because nobody expected it. Now that Yahoo did it, other ISPs might follow suit.
so my question going back here, I didn't mean to take us off.
Oh, it's fine.
But I think I needed clarification. So what you're talking about here, is there these initials that you're using that I'm unfamiliar with? We don't have to worry about it if we're using a third party.
If you're using a third-party app, that's fine. Just make sure that when I show a practical example of an SPF record, it looks like I'll break it down step by step.
But they take care of that. We don't have to be worried.
Right. So this would be on your own domain, right? You add in what they call a DNS record. An A record typically points to your website, right? And a text record is what you would put this under. It's an option in a drop-down. You can just add it. Or it's also known as an SPF record. You can do both. But anyway, so it's a text record here. So I apologize if you can't see it. But so obviously you're saying what version of the SPF framework are you using? This is SPF 1. Currently we're at 1. And you're saying, for this SPF record, I want to include this domain, _spf.google.com. This means that all email coming out of the Google interface, the Gmail app, is actually allowed to send email on your behalf. And include infusionmail.com. So if I send email from Infusionsoft, we actually have a special domain that all our email servers fall under, like how Google has a special domain for all their email servers to fall under. You'd include that, or any domains that you send mail out of. And at the very end, dash all. This means to prohibit any other email explicitly. You can also do a soft fail, which is a little tilde, but that's basically an SPF record. If you wanted to also send email out of your web server, you'd include the word MX. So you do VSPF1 MX, the domains or IP addresses that you're sending mail out of, dash all.
And that goes in under with your GoDaddy
Yes.
domain.
Yep.
I work with domains all the time. I'm not familiar with this.
That's okay. So if you've ever configured your domain to ever point to your web server, you've probably set your name servers once before.
Mm-hmm.
And you've probably configured an IP address that says, all right, this name server should point here.
Right.
It's the same exact process. It's another one.
It's in a different place.
Yeah. It's actually in the same place. You see a bunch of names and numbers and a TTL on the page, you're in the right place. You just drop this in, and you'll be fine. If you're not sure, which is totally possibly not sure, you can just check with your email service provider, and you'll be all set. And they'll tell you what you should put in there. You can obviously just Google around, how do I set up SPF with MailChimp? They have a fantastic article showing you exactly how to do that. And shameless plug, I have this address, which I explain SPF at a more practical level on my own personal site, just to explain and walk you through the process. It's a short link. Again, I broke down really easy short link, but it's totally fine for this. So you just write that down. It's case sensitive. So here's what I recommend. I'm sorry, if you were writing that down, I'll get back to it.
Yes.
Yeah, BZ, capital B, lowercase z, lowercase l, HH, capital, lowercase m.
So that's basically to cover that change that Gmail and Yahoo now has, so that both those emails are included.
If you do that, right?
Safe.
Right. I still don't recommend using a Yahoo email address because they will reject it. Like, even if you have SPF set up, they will still reject it.
Why?
Because that's a policy.
They have different things?
Yeah, they're going against the expectations, against the trend, and they're actually prohibiting all from addresses not sent from their network to be set as Yahoo.
Well, like I said, what I did in my third-party service, I just went in there and I changed the from address to one that actually comes from one of my domains.
Okay, yeah, and that's all.
That worked.
Yep.
Rather than, it used to be a Yahoo address.
Yep.
My from address. Now it's an actual domain address.
Yep.
And that works.
It
But
does.
I was going to say that when that happened, it kind of happened out of the blue.
Mhm.
And so for business people that were using third party, I mean, it was like a shock. You know?
Absolutely. Yeah, we had a lot of customers that called in about it.
Yeah, it's like, what's going on?
Yeah.
And one of the things that my particular company uses, and they're called mynewsletterbuilder.com,
Mhm.
and they said that what they're working on to do is to build into their service a so that each one of their customers will have an email that says, you know, like Alexandria at, you know,
That's what MailChimp does. It's called self-signing.
Okay.
So basically, it looks like it's coming from Joe at joemanda.com,
Right. Okay.
but it's really coming from their servers,
Okay.
and that's okay.
So.
Yeah.
So, but you work with Mail. I've never tried MailChimp. I'm
Mhm.
curious because I know it's used a lot with
Mhm.
WordPress. So
They're definitely industry leaders in this front, where they
talk a little
do
more about
everything
MailChimp
on the
and
up and
how
up.
to integrate that and why we do that.
Yeah.
Okay.
We might not have time. We're already at 40 minutes, so I'm trying to be respectful of some time. But if we want to, we could dive into it. I mean, the MailChimp settings, when you first become a customer, you're setting things up in a campaign. They walk you right through it. They have links that describe what does self-signing mean. By default, they self-sign all email, which is totally fine. Most people didn't have to worry about it. But if you were intentional, you didn't want to have it self-signed by MailChimp, and you wanted to be from your domain only, you would check that box, but you have to have SPF set up. They walk you right through all that stuff. So that said, right, so when you're sending email out of WordPress, here's the takeaway, right? Use an ESP if you're sending emails on a regular basis, such as doing a newsletter of some kind. Definitely want to use an ESP. There's a cool thing that MailChimp does. They have a service called Mandrill. Mandrill allows you to intercept the emails coming out of WordPress and send it through the MailChimp network. Mandrill is different than MailChimp. It's a more sophisticated tech requirement to understand how it works. But if you follow the instructions and you read their tutorials, you'll totally understand how it works. You just enable it into WordPress. You have to authenticate your API key back and forth. They show you right on how to do that. You copy and paste. You set up your SPF record. You set up what they call a DKIM record, because you're going to be self-signing your own email coming out of that server, but you're having MailChimp delivered for you. More technical, but something to definitely keep in mind, that Mandrill is an option if you don't want to send emails out of, a constant contact by hand all the time, and you already have the means to send email from WordPress. This is a perfect bolt-in that you can just configure it once and you're done, and it'll last forever. The thing is that Mandrill, unlike MailChimp, you could send up to 12,000 emails per month, which is a lot of email. But of course, it has a higher tech requirement, so if you're not comfortable setting up SPF, probably recommend to avoid Mandrill. But if you have someone else on your team who's familiar with all this stuff, tell them to set up Mandrill, and you can totally set it up. The beauty of it is that you can trust that the email will get sent safely and securely out of MailChimp's sort of technology versus your web server. And more advanced, if you already have an existing mail server, which a lot of people also have, there's plugins for WordPress that allow you to configure your SMTP settings. In a nutshell, it just means you can send mail from another service. But it's a little bit more old school, but you can also configure that as well. The issue with that is that sometimes it can be problematic. If you change passwords, your SMTP will break. If you change password on Mandrill, your email will still get delivered. So there's pros and cons to it. Again, they're slightly more advanced if you're using Mandrill or SMTP. Otherwise, stick to like a MailChimp or a Constant Contact or any other email service that you regularly use. So here's my recommendations. We're almost wrapping up here. Always use an ISP if you're using it for marketing purposes. Be sure you set up SPF, even if you are using an ESP. Segment your list. Make sure that you don't send everyone all the time. Figure out which are your most engaged audience, right? Your engaged customers. Send only to them. Send email that only people want. I know that sounds like common sense, but a lot of people think, well, if they're on my list, they're my list, I can send email to them. That is not the right attitude to have with email, because those recipients can block you just as quick as you can send an email, right? All it takes is really just 2% or more of your audience to report you as spam, and you won't be able to email them again. And just be intentional and thoughtful with email. Think about, what is the experience? Does this person legitimately want this email? Would they be upset if they didn't get this email? That's basically the standard you want to think about. Would they be upset if they did not receive this email? If they would, then send them an email. If they would not be upset, they would not miss your email, you probably don't need to send it. You could use alternate means. They probably went to your blog and they probably subscribed to it for a reason, so only send them that content. Here's what I don't recommend. Don't buy a list, period. Don't buy a list at all. Don't rent a list. Don't borrow a list. Don't buy a list that someone who emailed you. I have 100,000, B2B professionals. It's yours today for $120 on PayPal. I accept Bitcoin, right? Don't buy any of that stuff. Those are either generated or they're actually just really bad email lists. You can actually buy a list and contact them through other ways. Whatever's compliant with the FTC, you can absolutely follow that. But just don't email them. Don't import your entire address book. This is another mistake I see. People import my email address because I've emailed them before, and it's coming out of their email service, and they never opted in. Just because you have an email address does not mean you have permission. It is absolutely vital, and that's what all the ESPs are united against. They don't want people sending mass emails who did not elect to receive them. Don't send through an Outlook. We've all known this before. To do a blind carbon copy and paste everyone in there. Don't do that. It's risky. You'll accidentally CC everyone. Everyone will hate you for it. They'll laugh at you. But also at the same time, it's also an email risk. If someone hits report spam, your entire email server is blocked. And try not to send, even though I say never, try not to send bulk emails from your WordPress server alone. You'll get nasty grams from them. When they find out that you got their server blocked, they will shut you down in terms of no more email from this account. So if you're not sure, just ask. You can always ask them, hey, I'm trying to send an email from the server. Are there any special settings I should use? Any recommendations? Some of them might actually already have services that said, okay, if you're going to do this, use this plugin and configure these settings, and you'll be fine. And that's it. So I do have, I guess, a little time for some Q&A.
I have one last question.
Go for it.
So I am using a third-party email server,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm thinking about changing over to MailChimp because it seems to be like standard.
Sure. Right.
Maybe it was, I'm looking at another one, but when you change your email address from one to another, you have to like re-authenticate all over again.
Sometimes, right.
Okay, well,
That's
and
a
I'm
good question.
thinking, I have a small list. It's only 200 or 300 people.
Right.
Actually, it's almost 5.
Right.
But even people that have opted in, they don't always follow through and
Of course.
authenticate, even though they want to be on it, stuff like that. So do you have any suggestions on how to, if you were going to change it from one service to another, doesn't matter who they are, and you know that you're going to run into that problem or that it's likely, would you do it in like small groups so that you can kind of manage it a little better and see if they'll re-authenticate themselves
Right.
and recommit themselves?
Right. So that's called just email confirmation. So really good question. So basically the question is, just in a nutshell, say you have an old list that you've been mailing, and now you're moving to a new service, like a MailChimp or maybe an Infusionsoft.
Yeah.
What should you do, right? You should probably stay in contact with that list. Don't let that list age out and expire, right? Still stay in contact with them. Send with the old services you have been. And then when you're ready, right, you can absolutely import them and just continue that email. However, Email, okay, this gets a little complicated, but generally speaking, I recommend as a best practice, do double opt-in confirmation if you can.
With your current
Yeah,
list.
with the new service,
Okay.
do a double opt-in confirmation. You might not get the response that you want. That's okay. You're following best email practices.
Okay.
It's a difference between the letter of the law and the spirit of the law. The spirit of the law is that you should only be sending email to people who want your email, who have elected to receive it from that email server. The letter of the law, you don't have to do it, right? But the spirit of it, most ESPs will be okay if you just import it and send. But you make sure that you turn off the email that's going out of your other service as well. So turn that off and stick to that. The problem becomes when people think that they have to only send to those confirmed emails. You don't. You can still, send in more email after the fact. It's a good idea to
But the
confirm.
new service may not accept it moving over. It's
Right. So
I'm not
MailChimp,
concerned about it.
once you first send an email to MailChimp, they automatically score your account as to how healthy your email list might be. And again, not just MailChimp, there's other ESPs that do that. We're one of them. We will score your account, and we will determine if you need double opt-in. We're looking for bounces. We're looking for spam reports. We're looking for no engagement.
So you're not necessarily looking for double opt-in.
Right.
It's already
We
done.
recommend it, but it's not required.
Right, because like I said, a lot of the people that are on my list,
Mhm.
I actually talk to them.
Yeah.
And I'll say, hey, did you get the last newsletter?
Right.
What did you think? Blah, blah, blah. They'll say, oh, yeah. And just this last one, I asked them, every single one, the same question about the same topic. And they, oh, I didn't see that.
Right.
Well, it's because sometimes they get a little long.
Mhm.
And so with Yahoo, particularly, if you have to click on the bottom if it's too long.
Oh, right, because we got to continue seeing
Right,
that
right,
because they
right.
truncate it. Yeah.
Right. So I'm just thinking, if these are my regular people,
Yeah.
who want to hear from me, and
So here's my recommendation off of that, right? So say you have a long email, I recommend don't send long emails. You could actually, if you wanted to, publish it as a blog post, right, within your WordPress site, and link to it, and just give them a little excerpt.
okay,
And that would be something that is a good way to, if you have lots of articles and say it's linear fashion,
right.
that's a great way just to let people know, hey, here's a topic, because when you want them to click, you don't just want them to read, you want them to click, and that will drive them to click. Because clicking, the ESPs track that, ISPs track that in terms of seeing engagement. If the user's clicking, it means that they want this email, assuming they didn't click the unsubscribe link, they want this email, and keep sending it to them. It's good. It also gives you good analytics into what articles are people into.
Mm-hmm.
And most ESPs offer really good analytics on that.
Okay, thanks, Jen.
Yes.
I have two questions.
Yes.
One is the WordPress specific. I heard you say at the beginning that WordPress is not free, and then I heard you also say a couple of times sending email through WordPress. Can you clarify that? Like,
Sure.
maybe first grade level?
Sure. So basically, if you're going to send, again, most people don't typically have this need. Typically, if they're going to send email from WordPress, they're being very intentional about it. There's some plugins out there, I don't know the names, but there's some plugins out there that allow you to do a mailing list in WordPress. Like they facilitate that to make that easy. And they can actually maintain a blog delivery system to automatically send email out of your WordPress instance. It's basically that topic.
Is the collection email like say through or something like that?
Sure.
Where they collect the email, does that count for that?
A good example, right? So I think Event Espresso is one of them that might send emails from your WordPress instance. So if you're doing anything like that in sort of an official capacity of sending emails in relation to an event or purchase, or they want to hear more from you, you probably want to look towards an ESP.
So, but the email is.
If it's being physically sent out of WordPress, that's the issue.
Okay, so even though it's not like, so it's on like, I think it's on maybe.
Sure.
With the domain.
Mm-hmm.
So, but it's going through that events manager plugin, thus it's going through WordPress, right?
Right.
So we need that.
You probably might already have an SMTP server already configured with that plugin. An SMTP server basically functions the same way that I was talking about how Mandrill functions, but basically you're configuring the settings to say to go through GoDaddy or go through this other email service. It's more technical by nature, but that's probably how they have that set up.
question is kind of not specific to WordPress, but a couple of things that, like a personal email, and you're sending lots of emails. That you get dinged. I mean, I have a friend who her business email is her personal email.
A lot of people
Everything's all
do
together.
that. Yeah.
And so it's nonprofit, and she has her list,
Mhm.
but on top of that, she also uses a Cox email address,
Okay.
or Cox email, and on top of that, that's her address, but then she uses Outlook.
Okay.
So a couple of things that I heard you say was like a red flag for me
Sure.
in terms of what she does, because I tried to convince her to get a .com.
Sure.
But I'm wondering, like, how, like, is that really important, and how then do I explain that to her?
Really good question. So basically, if you're using a personal email for day-to-day use of, let's say, a nonprofit or a business, and you're using like a Cox email address or CenturyLink or whatever, then what, right? Try to hear me in the sense that it's not so much the technology that's the issue, because emails will still be sent and received, right, for the most part. It's the behavior, right? She probably doesn't have bounce tracking. She probably doesn't have email infrastructure set up. And it's not even so much about Outlook. Outlook's fine. It sends and receives emails. That's fine. You can configure it with Cox or Gmail or anything else. It's the principle of sending, copying and pasting a list of emails into a blind carbon copy field. But,
Right.
you know, if you're going to send a mass email,
Which she does. She has multiple lists that she uses.
she might not be getting the email deliverability that she's getting.
That's what I think.
Yeah. That's the reality.
Okay, but I haven't been able to figure out, like, how to convince her of that.
Well,
But this might be a clue.
right. The honest thing, have her try out the email services out there. I mean, MailChimp is, again, it's free up to like 2,000 or 3,000 people. You really can't mess up the first time or
That's
two.
a whole lot more. I pay at every 500
Right.
name increment, so MailChimp is really cheap.
Right, for the first few,
Yeah.
few thousand. After that, then you can start to pay
So
out.
she can keep it the same, but
Yeah.
just add MailChimp.
Yeah, just try it. Have her try it and see. I mean, she doesn't get analytics and reporting, which is vital. She doesn't know which emails are bouncing. I mean, she will see a bounce, but it's not the same kind of bounce. She sees, like, this email address is invalid, but she didn't see if her mailbox is full.
Her big claim is, I always have access to my emails because it's Outlook, right?
You have access to your emails, MailChimp, or any other service.
Okay, so,
There's also, I have had, Cox isn't going to go away, but I have had ISPs go away, internet service provider, and when I was using them as my email address, I had to start from scratch. Better to have your domain name for the email address, so you're in control of it. And it's more professional.
Right.
And it markets your brand.
And I also
And
think
then
about
have
like
it
the end
forward to your
picture,
email account.
right? So like the big
Address.
picture is that if I'm going to be I don't know what the official word is, if I'm going to donate money to a nonprofit of some kind, I will look to make sure that they're trustworthy and legitimate. And a part of that thought process is looking at the emails and where they're from and how they're sent. Maybe it's because I'm biased in the whole email space, but as a regular person, they want to make sure the emails that they're receiving to solicit donations are legitimate and that it's all consistent. They want to make sure they're giving the money to the organizations they expect, and it should come from their own domain, as you mentioned, the nonprofit domain. Good question. So a question here.
Since it's backing off what they were saying, another thing, even though Cox may be big, my mom's ISP was with MSN, and they changed everyone's email addresses.
Yeah, MSN to
they-
Live
Well,
to
they
now
ended up,
Outlook.com.
now they actually send them all to Gmail, but she had to redo everything, contact every friend. So if you're doing that for a business, you've lost everything.
And not only that, I mean, you could move constantly, right?
Yeah, if
Right.
your provider.
I'd switch broadband providers probably once every couple of years.
That's why.
And you don't want to be
I
locked into one just because it's your email.
okay, so here's another question.
Yeah.
Speaking of the .com. So I just discovered yesterday, after an hour on the phone with GoDaddy, this is how guilty I am. I did not know that all the emails that I was deleting from my Gmail that were coming to my .com address forwarded to my Gmail. I did not know that they were all still there in the GoDaddy inbox.
Yes.
And then all of a sudden I was getting people saying, you didn't get my email, you didn't get my email. And just today I got yelled at by Chris. The .com, then I was thinking, okay, I'm not really doing that much with my business right now. I'll just do the Gmail.
Right.
I'll just tell everybody to use the Gmail.
Sure.
But now I'm hearing maybe
You can still use the Gmail. It's not the end of the world to use Gmail for a small operation.
For problems that you don't have your settings set up correctly on GoDaddy. I learned that the hard way when my mail got shut down. I had 5 years of mail in my ISP box, not knowing it was leaving a copy on the server.
Mhm.
There are settings you can go in to not leave a copy when you have it forward to Gmail. So you can have it delete after 5 days in case you want to back up. That it's your settings. So you may have to do one really couple hours purging to get everything out to free up your bandwidth, but you just make it not keep a copy on the server.
So it's either a GoDaddy setting, or I think I know the setting that you're talking about. So Gmail gives you an option to pull in messages from another third party using POP or IMAP. If you're using POP, which is what most people do, and they're pulling in another email service, there's a checkbox that says leave messages on server, because typically what POP does, it sucks down all your messages and it's gone from GoDaddy and it's just only in Gmail. If you want that, you can indicate that in the settings. Most people, that's a little destructive to do that to their processes, so they always keep copies just for safekeeping. But you can double check that. It's in your Gmail settings. It's in one of the 15 tabs on the top. Like IMAP, POP, SSL access. But yeah, absolutely, just double check with GoDaddy and they'll tell you.
Say the advantages of IMAP for people like multiple computers.
Right. So a lot of you have computers here, a lot of you have smartphones. Most of that email is being accessed with something called IMAP, which is a more modern way of accessing email on a device. And it always resolves to the email server, and it never sucks it down. It downloads what they call the headers of the email. So you're never actually downloading the email. You're downloading the reference to the email, and then if you want to delete it, you hit delete, and it wipes it off the device and the server automatically. It's less problematic to use IMAP, generally speaking, because it's central. You're accessing the email on that server, not necessarily one that's on your device. The reason why POP was POP back in the day is because typically, we all remember we had to dial up on some service, whether it was AOL or whatever, you had to pay per minute. Some people, right, they pay only per minute, they dial up, download their email, sign off. And what it is, it sucked the email from that server down into the email software, you'd interact with it, dial up again, and then it would just send out those emails. So because we're all interconnected much more, and obviously just a whole cloud environment of just where it is, IMAP is the way it is.
And is IMAP an app? What is IMAP?
IMAP, I forget exactly what it stands for, but
Where is it?
IMAP is just an email protocol setting. And just like how there's POP, point of presence or something. It's basically, it's just another way to access your email. Most email services that you use, Gmail or Yahoo or others, they give you instructions. If you just look up POP or IMAP in your help center, they'll tell you exactly how to access your email. Most people should be accessing it via IMAP, if possible. Yes?
Just to clarify, so if you have a .com GoDaddy, is it operating like Gmail, or is it using the core of your Gmail, forwarding? Or is it like...
It's its own separate mail server by default. You can configure it to do other things like that.
So you can just interact with that.
Yeah, typically in GoDaddy, you'll know that you have a GoDaddy server set up if your email server is something .secureserver.net. That's typically what their email servers are listed as. And that's how you know you're accessing. But every web hosting environment or hosting environment is different, so you can always feel free to contact them or look in their help documentation. This is a topic that all of them have covered. Same thing with SPF. They all have that topic covered. Yes?
If you want to build up your email list through your website, so say one of my clients right now is a home remodel business. So maybe the way they'll build their list is to say, sign up for our email list and we'll send you 15 tips to prepare to remodel your home.
Yeah.
So So the delivery of that document, you would just give them a link, and they share it with all their friends. Or they,
Possibly, but
would you deliver that through MailChimp or something?
yep, you just configure your email service to automatically deliver.
Or it's an automatic?
MailChimp has a limited option for this, but to do what they call autoresponders, so where, same thing with Aweber and the other out there. So basically when someone opts in, after they opt in, send them this email. And that email would then either contain the attachment or link to the file.
So then the-
Don't get discouraged if there's a link to the file. They do that for speed and security, just so, because when people send an attachment in an email, it slows down other emails that should be going out on the server.
Could the link be a document that you set up like on a landing page that is readily available in the application? So if it lives on your WordPress site,
Yeah.
like your MailChimp is grabbing that link.
You absolutely could. So if you ever use the WordPress SEO plugin, if you ever felt adventurous enough to click onto the Advanced tab, you can absolutely configure that to say this page, don't put it in my robots file, don't put it in my sitemap. For anyone who accesses this site, do no index, no archive, and nobody will be able to see it by default. It's a few extra steps, but you absolutely could.
I was just thinking about if you had a page that was password protected as well, and when you email them the password or something.
You could.
Give them the link, and you can change it up every once in a
What's
while.
the digital downloads plugin?
I don't know the names of them, but there's a few digital download plugins. So if you're doing this in an enterprise in nature, so say it's a business and you're selling these documents, you'd probably use a digital download or digital protection plugin or system.
I think the name is Easy Digital Downloads, something like that.
But you're saying that if it's just a once in a while, like you sign up for a
Yeah.
newsletter, you might have a whole bunch of that.
Right.
And you're just gonna give this.
Yeah. In theory, it's a good thing if people are willing to share it and steal it and share it with their friends. It's probably a good document that you should feel good about. Most people don't have content that good. So that's something to keep in mind. Oh, cool. I think I have room for one more question, and then we're going to wrap up on this section. All right. Well, thank you guys so much. I'm available to ask more questions. You can always shoot me a tweet.
You didn't tell us about Fusion.
All right. Well, I'll do it afterward. I feel uncomfortable pitching commercial services up here because that is sort of the verbal, sort of informal contract of this group. We're here to help each other. And, I mean, Infusionsoft is, it's a sales and marketing software that I can answer questions on that. But like I said, if there's any questions that you have on your site, you want a second opinion, hey, I'm trying to send an email from my domain, can you check it out for me? It takes me 30 seconds to look and tell you what that. So shoot me a note. Let me know if you have any questions. Check out my blog. I have a few articles on there about SPF, and actually one article actually on there, but it shouldn't be too hard to find. Thank you guys so much. Thank you. Oh, the user group, yeah. Yeah, let me wrap this up here.